Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very special edition of the Rebel News live stream, in which we are covering the 2025 Ontario provincial election, otherwise known as the election absolutely nobody wants, but the election we're getting nevertheless. I'm David Menzies, and now that the polls have closed, we're keeping our eyes on who shall emerge as the winners and losers in this most unwanted and unneeded provincial election. Certainly, there are many storylines afoot. For example, will the Doug Ford Progressive Conservatives maintain their supermajority, or will the electorate punish this government, much like they did to the David Peterson Liberals in 1990 when they called an early election? Furthermore, which party shall emerge as the official opposition? Will Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie win her riding in Mississauga East Cooksville, or will she lose it to Patrick Brown's mother-in-law, who is running under the PC party somehow? And how about independent MPP Bobbi Ann Brady in Haldimand, Norfolk? Will she do the improbable a second time around by going up against Ford's Big Blue Machine and scoring victory yet again? As well, what about independent candidate Sarah Jama? Jama was dumped by the NDP after making anti-Semitic comments in 2023. Will she win in Hamilton Centre as an independent? And if so, what does that say about the voters who reside in Hamilton Centre? And speaking of cookie NDP cranks, will bizarro anti-fat shamer Jill Andrew hang on to her riding in Toronto, St. Paul's? Lots of balls in play, but stay tuned, folks. The passage of time shall reveal all. Now, I can tell you, we have, I believe it's 7 special guests that are going to weigh in with their opinions as the ballots are counted. But I want to hear from you too. So if you can go on to Rumble or if you can go on to YouTube, you can send me a chat. You can monetize it at any rate. I know in the normal live stream that we run at Rebel News, it has to be at least $5, but all bets are off on this Ontario provincial election night. And I will read your feedback on air. So please go to Rumble, go to YouTube, let me know what you're thinking. And I see right on deck right now, I have an extra special guest. That would be Jim Karahalios. He is the leader of the New Blue Party. And it's always a delight to speak to Jim and to get his insight on Ontario politics. So first of all, Jim, thank you so much for making time to come on the show. And how are things looking for the New Blue Party, especially I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to guess that she is your favorite candidate of all, Belinda Karahalios.
She certainly is running in Cambridge again, where she was the MPP for 4 years and the first politician in Canada to vote against COVID lockdown measures and to take strong stances like opposing drug injection sites, definitely ahead of the curve when she was an MPP and running again in Cambridge. The New Blue Party, Dave, you remember we ran in 2022 as our first election. We had about a year to get it off the ground after I was fighting back from a osteosarcoma diagnosis and back to full health. We had 123 candidates in that race. We finished as the fifth strongest party in that election, the best result of any party in their first election in Ontario since 1934. And in this campaign, we had almost no time, Dave, to get candidates off the ground. But we did file 108 candidates. So we're well on our way to solidifying ourselves as the fifth strongest party in Ontario politics, right behind the Greens and far, far ahead of all the other parties that have been around longer than us.
Well, Jim, congratulations for the progress you've made. But let's talk about why are we here to begin with, Jim? I can't remember the last time I went to any kind of an election in the dead of winter, and here we are. The Doug Ford PCs have a supermajority government, as you well know. And I know the ostensible policy reason of the Doug Ford PCs is that we need a strong mandate going up against Donald Trump and his proposed tariffs. Yet, Jim, didn't they have that mandate? Am I missing something? The Ford PCs had almost another year and a half until June 2026 is when the next scheduled election would have occurred. Jim, 18 months in politics, that's an eternity, is it not?
Certainly. And, this is our first time talking, Dave, in this campaign. And voters, I say that because voters seem to have changed their perspective from the first day that the writ was dropped to the fourth. And a lot of voters didn't even know there was an election going on until this week. We had that terrible storm in the middle of the campaign, which made things very difficult. Look, Doug Ford's just taking advantage of the fact that the New Blue Party doesn't get the coverage that we should be getting from the mainstream media, and even some of the alternative media doesn't like to cover us because they're hearing voices in their ear from the PC campaign activists just dreaming of the day when there's another leadership race to replace Doug Ford, and that'll solve everything. So he's really taken advantage of the fact that he doesn't really have strong opposition. The Liberals and the NDP are there, but when he's doing every policy proposal is the exact mirror image of what the Liberals and the NDP want. There's not much opposition to be had there. He certainly didn't have a mandate during COVID to spend more than any other premier had ever spent. He didn't have a mandate after COVID to continue the reckless spending. He didn't have a mandate for anything because everything he ran on in 2018 and 2022, he did the opposite after he got his mandate. But, the PC lobbyists saw an opportunity to extend their mandate by 2 years by calling an election in the dead of winter when it would be really hard to get a strong grassroots campaign going. And they took advantage of it because they're very cynical operators there. And pointing and blaming Donald Trump was a good optical way to address it. But obviously, no one believes that's why he called the election.
No, I agree, Jim. I think they were looking at rosy poll numbers, and that's what prompted that. And Donald Trump, I think, has been a gift to Doug Ford and the PCs. Um, Basically, in provincial elections, usually it's the two H's that are paramount, aren't they? Healthcare and housing. But that's been very muted, I think, in this election. It's all about Ford, perhaps very successfully, wrapping himself up as the superhero Captain Canada, especially since the lights are off and nobody's home in Ottawa right now, and campaigning against somebody not on the ballot, namely Donald Trump and those potential tariffs. And like I said, we will see the numbers in the minutes ahead. Maybe rolling the dice in such a way, cynical as it is, maybe it's going to pay dividends for the premier.
Well, in the short term, it might. He might get away with this election, but I think what the PCs are seeing and calling an election 2 years earlier than they need is they don't want to wait another 2 years for an election because they know they're running out of rope here with Ontario voters, and a lot of Ontario voters will wake up in the next 2 years, and eventually they're going to catch on, especially now that the boogeyman Justin Trudeau's not there anymore, and Doug Ford and the PC operatives can't blame Trudeau for all the wrongs of Ontario. Eventually, the mirror is going to turn on him, and people are going to start realizing that rising cost of housing, unaffordability, lack of affordability, and the healthcare that hasn't improved under Doug Ford's watch. All the buck stops with him on all three of those, and a lot of other issues. And they're going to catch on. So he's sneaking an election by here, try to extend his mandate. But time's running out for Doug Ford and the Ontario PCs, and we've got to look beyond them. And it's going to be a long haul to get Ontario's finances back in place. But the New Blue Party is a place where people believe the best is yet to come, and we're taking a long-term view of Ontario politics. And this is our second election. We're running 108 candidates, and we'll be ready for the next one after that.
Well, certainly when you mention the cost of living, I think that also dovetails into Ford's strategy. Namely, if Trump gets in and those tariffs go through, 25% tariffs, if you think the cost of living is bad now, just you wait till you see what happens later. But, in terms of the New Blue Party, Jim, certainly, in my humble opinion, you are a true blue conservative party. You alluded to this earlier, that when we look at the Doug Ford PCs, I would argue more progressive, less conservative. A few points, and I mean, I wear my colors on my sleeve. Earlier this month, I came out with a list: 10 reasons why conservatives cannot vote for the Doug Ford PCs. Oh, believe you me, there were a lot more than 10 reasons. But really, look at the sex ed curriculum in 2018, Jim. I clearly remember the Doug Ford PC saying we were going to rein in this nonsense. It's gotten worse, I would argue. If you're a fiscal conservative, we're looking at record debt and deficit. So I'm kind of like Clara Peller, the old lady in the old Wendy's ads, Jim, in the one that would always go, "Where's the beef?" If you're a social or a fiscal conservative, I think this party has been a tremendous letdown.
The Ford PCs have always been a letdown, whether it was John Tory in charge, Tim Hudak in charge, Doug Ford in charge. They do a really good job in leadership races, giving false hope to conservatives. I mean, I fell for it for a few years, Dave. I was a lot younger back then, a lot more naive. And I got tired of helping different leadership candidates and watching them forget about the voters that signed up to support them after they got a nice cushy appointment or got cozy with the next leader, or in Doug Ford's case, became leader themselves. The Ford PCs are never going to be a conservative party. We see this with Doug Ford right now. A lot of his vote base right now is dependent on a Justin Trudeau voter, and he's relying on that in this election. He's abandoned conservative voters. Our challenge is to, through a ground game, get the word out and let more and more people know about the New Blue, and reassure them that we're not a one-trick pony. A lot of people thought that, we in the first election in 2022 is a COVID election, quote unquote COVID election, and we wouldn't run candidates again. We have 108 in this election campaign. We'll be ready for the next one after that. And as our visibility increases and people feel secure that we're always going to be on the ballot, we're always going to be around, our growth can only increase.
And Jim, there's a handful of ridings I'm giving extra special attention to tonight, and numero uno, I should think, is Mississauga East Cooksville. Two factors there. Bonnie Crombie, the Liberal leader, this is her riding, and she's going up against. And I want to get your viewpoint on this because I find this somewhat baffling. Sylvia Gualtieri, who is Patrick Brown's mother-in-law, and from what I hear, this is a real neck and neck race. I think it'll be enormously embarrassing for Miss Crombie if she loses, especially after being the mayor in Mississauga for a decade. But one of the things, dots I cannot connect, Jim, are the fact that why are the Doug Ford PCs allowing Patrick Brown people back into the party? Patrick Brown was ousted in January of 2018. It was no less a palace coup. And yet here we have his mother-in-law with no political experience going in to fight against Bonnie Crombie. Miss Gualtieri's brother is the MPP for another Mississauga riding. I speak of Rudy Guzzetto. And we did a report, Jim, where it looks like sneaky Patrick Brown is using senior City of Brampton staffers to work on Sylvia's campaign, just as he used these staffers to work on his ambitions to become the federal conservative leader back in 2022. But in any event, if I'm Doug Ford, if I'm his inner circle, what's in it for them to allow the Patrick Brown people back into this party?
Well, look, for the first time in my life, I'm going to sympathize with Patrick Brown because I think every man doesn't want to upset their mother-in-law. So if he may have been feeling some pressure there to help her out, doesn't want to bear the wrath of their mother-in-law. Sylvia's been around Mississauga politics for quite a long time, so she might be running for the first time in provincial election, but I think she's got a support base there. So we'll see how that turns out. Kevin Peck's running for the New Blue Party in that riding. We did well in that riding in the last election. We beat the Green Party, so we finished fourth, one of the many ridings where we finished ahead of the Greens in our first campaign. You're getting to the point of the question, why did the PCs allow the people that were around the leader's office when Patrick Brown was in charge? It's because it's the same people, Dave. I mean, we thought that at the time when I was running the Axe the Carbon Tax campaign, that now is very popular amongst mainstream conservatives, that slogan and that advocacy. I was also in charge of the Take Back Our PC Party campaign to try to snuff out the voter fraud that was going on. We all thought it was a quote-unquote Patrick Brown problem. It quite clearly was not a Patrick Brown problem because Doug Ford, when he got in power, he did nothing to address it. He brought in an industrial carbon tax. We have 2 carbon taxes in Ontario. There's never been any other nomination elections in the PC party since Doug Ford took over after that 2018 election. Every candidate is now handpicked by Doug Ford. The PC president that was put in place, a lobbyist, handpicked by Doug Ford. They don't have elections. So Doug Ford solved the voter fraud problem in the Ontario PC party by just stopping elections. What a concept. He's a genius, right? Like there's a great way to get rid of voter fraud. Just stop votes. Stop having votes. So it's not a Patrick Brown problem. It's the people behind the PC party. They had no problem with what Patrick Brown was doing as leader. They simply were upset because it wasn't them doing it.
Incredible. Jim, we're all out of racetrack, I'm afraid. So I want to thank you again for coming on. And my sources tell me that in the York Region riding of Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, a certain journalist voted for the New Blue candidate by the name of Rosaria Wiseman. No names, but in any event, Jim, thank you again. So happy to hear that you're on the mend as well. And please keep us appraised of anything new that's happening at the New Blue.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, sir. Well, there you go. That was Jim Karahalios, folks, of the New Blue Party, the leader, no less. Now, I believe, speaking of alternative parties, because it's not just the big three that you have to vote for these days, we have the president of the Ontario Party. That would be Tom Marazzo. And do we have Tom yet? Oh, I beg your pardon, folks. We have Derek Sloan, the leader of the Ontario Party. Forgive me, Derek, right party, wrong person. I won't make that mistake again. But tell me, one of the big questions, Derek, is why in the middle of winter, why when we have a government with a supermajority, why are Ontarians going to the polls in the first place? I don't know about you, Derek. I don't know a single friend, colleague, family member, you name it, who has said, oh, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to have an Ontario provincial election. They will all want a federal election. I'll tell you that much. We're not getting that for months to come. But tell me, Derek, why are we here in the first place?
Well, hey, David, great to be here. And you're totally right. It was a self-serving election. I mean, they clearly just wanted to lock in their power for another 4 years, using this crisis to their own advantage. Nobody liked this election. We were hearing that nobody saw a need for it. He already had a mandate, as you pointed out. He didn't need any additional seats to do what he wants to do. So like you said, a waste of close to $200 million in this very cold and very short election.
That's kind of ironic, isn't it, Derek? I remember back in the day when Doug and his dearly departed brother, the former mayor of Toronto, Rob, they had I think, one of the best slogans of our early 20th century when it comes to politics, and that was respect for taxpayers. Not a lot of respect in terms of calling an unwanted election. And of course, the ostensible policy reason Doug says he needs a mandate to go up against Donald Trump and impending tariffs. Derek, didn't he already have that mandate, a supermajority, and an election that was a year and a half away?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there was no rationale for this. I mean, part of me, of course, I've never been a fan of Doug Ford, never approved of his leadership. But when this tariff talk was coming, and Doug Ford was trying to stand up and speak for Canada, I thought, well, at least somebody's trying to show some leadership. But it's clear that this was just a ruse to sort of use as a pretense for an early election. And he is campaigning instead of calling every trade association, meeting with every governor in the United States. This is the kind of thing he should have been doing, but instead he calls an election. So it is self-serving. It looks like he has won a majority again, but I hope it will be a chink that eats away at his armor over the next few years.
Yeah, and I'll make a prediction, Derek, that when all the votes are counted, I think this might be the lowest turnout in an Ontario election ever. I think 2022, as a matter of fact, had the record. I believe it was 44% of Ontarians came to the polls, which is really shameful. You can't even get half the population out to vote for your provincial government. I can't understand that. I'm sure you can understand it. But Derek, tell me, for those who are not familiar with the Ontario Party, because really it is a Herculean task, is it not, to have a new party, a startup party, and to gain traction to get somebody elected. What is the Ontario Party all about?
Well, the Ontario Party, in a nutshell, is about faith, family, and freedom. So we're about respecting the values that have made Ontario great. We're about respecting the freedoms that we've historically enjoyed in this country, and we recognize strong family units as the sort of bedrock of society. And we had a list of great policies this time that would have, taken back Ontario when it comes to education and getting indoctrination out of the school system. When it comes to immigration, getting our immigration system under control. A lot of people don't realize the province has constitutional authority and shares immigration authority with the federal government. taking back our healthcare system, taking back our streets and our homelessness and drug addiction and crime. So we wanted to do all that, but like you said, it is hard to break into the public consciousness. Canadians are very conservative, not politically, but conservative in the sense of they stick to the sort of tried and true political parties. But really, whoever's leading Ontario, the debt is going up, our housing prices are increasing, healthcare and education are deteriorating. So we really do need new choices. That message was resonating with people at the doors, but with only 28 days, it was very challenging to campaign properly.
And yet, Derek, I think perhaps the Doug Ford PCs, their gamble has maybe paid off, running against a candidate not even on the ballot. I'm talking about Donald Trump. Doug Ford reimagining himself as Captain Canada, especially since nobody's home in Ottawa right now, and playing the fear factor that if those tariffs come in, you need somebody strong who can negotiate with the U.S. president, because quite frankly, that seems to be the number one overwhelming issue that's being talked about, that's being written about. And even the other big issues that you mentioned, housing, healthcare, homelessness, they really haven't resonated as far as I can tell during this election. Derek, what say you?
Well, you're right. I mean, in my experience, pretty much everybody recognizes that those are major issues, but they were very focused on this issue with Donald Trump. They were very focused on, the existential threat to their livelihoods that this whole thing might pose, and so that became kind of the talking point. I would say if we had more time, I really do think that we could have opened the door to those other issues, because so many people. I remember talking to one guy at the door who I had spoken to 3 years ago at the door, who didn't have a family doctor then and still does not have one now. So there really are a lot of other issues that we could have brought in, but the time frame on this election was just crazy. The first half of the election, a lot of people weren't even on the ballot yet, and people were still voting from day one. So a lot of shenanigans going on, and I hope they reflect on that and maybe change some of the rules around how these elections are conducted.
Yeah, I guess right now, for what it is, the system is what it is. And Derek, it's kind of uncanny if the Doug Ford PCs cruise to a third majority. I don't think that's been done in the province's history. Three majority governments in a row by one party. I stand to be corrected on that. But what I find amazing is that with any election, you have to say to yourself, are you better off now than you were? Well, in the case of the Doug Ford PCs, 7 years ago in 2018. And I don't think I could. I know of many people, well, aside from investors in the pharmaceutical industry during COVID, that would say, yeah, I'm way better off. How do you think that played in terms of this election, Derek?
Well, people recognize that things are worse now than they were before. I think what it is that people really are choosing the lesser of several evils in their mind. And, they just haven't got, the average person doesn't follow politics closely. So they haven't gotten to the point where they are able or ready or even know about some of the alternate parties, but they don't even like the three main ones. I didn't meet anybody who was really excited about Doug Ford or any of the other parties, but they just don't know who else to vote for. And so it's up to us to reach those people in the off season and get them ready for the next election.
Well, and on that note, Derek, you are a alternative when it comes to a conservative party. I feel that the PC party is way more progressive for most conservatives' liking and not that conservative whatsoever. One last question. I know it's a bit of a sticky one, but I was speaking to Jim Karahalios of the New Blue Party, and I keep hearing it all the time. I got to tell you, Derek, people are saying, why can't these two right of center parties get together? In political math, 1 + 1 = 3. It's already a Herculean task. So is there any hope of, in the future, you and the New Blue Party maybe getting together and coming at the electorate with greater strength?
Listen, I hope so. And obviously, these things are, more complicated than simply, one person wanting it to happen. But there have been overtures in the past, and hopefully there is a way to bridge that gap. I'm certainly open to those kind of discussions, and who knows? Maybe it's possible to happen. So let's hope for the best on that.
All right. Well, Derek, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And please don't be a stranger. And when all the ballots are counted, please let me know what kind of percentage the Ontario Party picked up in this unwanted and unneeded election to begin with. So thank you again, my friend.
Hey, thank you so much, David. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you. And folks, that was Derek Sloan of the Ontario Party. And I've just been told that one of the candidates who is, well, she's successful. And speaking of Herculean tasks, she's an independent candidate. And she is one of the ridings to watch on my list of 9 or 10. And without further ado, let me welcome Bobbi and Brady. Well, Bobbi and Brady, you did it again, didn't you?
Yes, we did it again when we were told we would never do it again. It's amazing.
Unbelievable. And Bobbi Ann, I knew I would likely have you as a guest on the show tonight. So what I did is, I don't know if you can tell, the color of my tie is purple. Because you see, I didn't want to wear red or green or orange or blue. And what I'm getting at, folks, Bobbi and Brady, who used to be a loyal PC party member, now running as independent when Doug Ford in the 22 election decided that they had their own cherry picked candidate, and Bobbi Ann Brady in her writing is very well respected, very well loved. And there was actually a smear campaign against her during this election. You see, Bobbi Ann Brady once wore a red dress into the legislature. That means she's a secret liberal, you see. Well, what do you know, Bobbi Ann Brady? Looks like the smear tactics didn't work, eh?
They didn't work. And, it's funny, when I wore that dress into the legislature, I made a joke one day. I said, I'm going to land up on someone else's literature. And there it was. But the good people of Haldimand Norfolk, they went out in spades today, and they voted, and they drove out that vote. And, it's heartening to see people defending democracy, people standing up for, a strong voice at Queen's Park that isn't tied to a party. No monopoly on a good idea, David.
100%. And I think your story is an incredible one. I mean, you go back to when you worked with Toby Barrett, going back to 1995 in the riding. He was well respected as well. And then he retired in 2021, and you had aspirations to run for being the PC candidate in that riding. Bobbi Ann, can you tell our audience what went awry? Because obviously, by the very fact you've won an election twice without a big blue machine behind you, it speaks to the respect and the love you have in Haldimand Norfolk. So why were you sort of candidate non grata going back to 2022?
Well, listen, I think it goes back to the fact that I had asked some questions, throughout the pandemic when I was a staffer, and I had also spoken out against the idea of the ministerial zoning order being pushed for the Nanticoke Industrial Park. There's a proposal on the table to build 15,000 homes out at the Nanticoke Industrial Park, and I think it's a bad idea. And I was very vocal about that. And so I think between asking questions that people were asking us in the constituency office at the time, and also pushing back against that development at the Nanticoke Industrial Park is what, that's the excuses I think that they would use if you ask them.
And Bobbi Ann, I was just looking at the numbers. Not only did you win, it was a landslide. The PC candidate, Amy Martin, I believe, like the former PC candidate, she is a mayor of a local municipality. But am I reading this correctly? You got over 65% of the vote, and Amy Martin, with the big blue machine behind her, got less than 24%. What do you
If
count?
you if you're reading that I'm in a vehicle right now. I've been kind of chilling out with my family, waiting for the call to come in, and I'm not a girl who likes to watch the numbers come in when my name is on the ballot. When I was a campaign manager, no problem, but when my name's on the ballot, I just wait for the call. And if you're telling me those are the numbers, David, then those are the numbers. And it just goes to show you that people in this riding, they really respect their independent voice. They respect the fact that I can go to Queen's Park and I can truly represent them. I don't have to be a brand ambassador. I can ask the tough questions of the government without having to toe a party line and somebody telling me that I can't do or say something.
And Bobbi, and I got to tell you, if Proline were taking wagers on the election, I would have bet a couple of bucks on you. Now, I'll tell you, it goes back to 2022, before we even met, before I even knew who you were. I remember going to cover the motorcycle congregation in Port Dover, and everywhere I drove, I saw Bobbi Ann Brady, and I thought, my goodness, by the sign tally, who is this Bobbi Ann Brady? And I said, but independent, what a poor dreamer. And then, holy moly, Bobbi Ann Brady, wins. Then I learned the backstory, which we spoke about, which is fascinating. And here we are in 2025. I got to tell you, when I drive around the GTA, I have never seen so few election signs, especially on private property. I discount ones on vacant lots. Anyone can put those up. I think that speaks to the apathy of this election in the middle of a brutal winter. But in your riding, Bobbi Ann, when myself and ace cameraman Lincoln J went out last week to do a little interview with you, yet again, your signs were everywhere and on private property. So I had a good inkling you were going to run away with this. And one of the things that I do not understand, and we brought this up during the interview, Bobbi Ann, is that for Doug Ford, this is personal for him. Last year at the legislature, he singled you out. He was angry. He was saying he was going to make you unemployed. And Bobbi Ann, I don't get it, because if the Ford PCs were, say, one seat away from a majority, that Bobbi Ann Brady, that was, she's the poison in the punch bowl that prevented a majority. But he's got a super majority. Who cares if there's one lone independent out there? Bobbi Ann, can you explain why the premier seems obsessed with the fact that you won one single riding?
I think that it's an embarrassment. I think that, what they said in 2022 is, we could run a monkey as long as it has a PC logo on its back. I mean, we saw an interview yesterday in Windsor where the premier answered a question that was asked of a candidate. And, so we see those tight controls. And in one riding in this province, I've loosened his control, and he doesn't like that.
It is baffling to me, again, especially since it looks like the Doug Ford PCs are heading for their third supermajority in a row, which I don't think has been done in this province, at least not in recent memory. So, we're running out of time, Bobbi Ann, but of course, the most important question of all is this, given that I can only see your face. What color of dress are you wearing tonight?
Oh, I have a green, like a teal jacket on, and underneath I have some black on. So I'm pretty neutral tonight.
Oh, well, good for you. Because, when you wear, well, I had no idea haberdashery was so politically charged in the province of Ontario.
Listen, David, when I get back to Queen's Park, you can keep an eye on all the colors that I wear. It's going to be fun.
Well, that is fantastic. Bobbi Ann Brady, I want to thank you for coming on, making some time for us. I want to say congratulations. And I guess a word to the wise, folks, whether you're a certain ex-NFL quarterback or a particular Ontario MPP, never bet against someone with the surname Brady. Bobbi Ann, a pleasure as always. Congratulations.
Thank you, David. Thanks so much. Have a great night.
You too. Take care. And that was Bobbi Ann Brady in the riding of Haldimand, Norfolk, who pulled another rabbit out of the hat, really, folks. As I've said, if you're a startup party or if you're an independent, it is a Herculean task to make headway. And Bobbi Ann Brady did it in 2022, and she did it in 2025. Even though Doug Ford seems obsessed with the fact that the PCs lost that solitary lone riding in southwestern Ontario. Unbelievable. So good for Bobbi Ann. What a win. And right up now, I believe we have Tom Marazzo of the Ontario Party, the president of the Ontario Party. Hey, Tom, how you doing there?
I'm good, David. It's nice to talk to you. I think this is technically the first time we've ever done a Rebel News interview together.
Well, you know what they say, Tom, you always remember your first time, right? Anyway, so Tom, I had the pleasure of speaking with your colleague, Derek Sloan, a couple of segments ago. And again, as one of the things I ponder is why Ontarians are going to the polls in the middle of a brutal winter. In the first place, we know that Doug Ford says he needs a mandate to fight against Donald Trump and his tariffs. I would argue he had a mandate. He had a supermajority government. He had an election a year and a half away, which is an eternity. What is your take, Tom? Is this political opportunism? The Ford PCs looked at the polls. They looked quite rosy. They looked at the strategy of running against somebody who's not even on the ballot, namely U.S. President Donald Trump. And, well, the early numbers are indicating that that strategy paid off. But I don't know, to me, something just doesn't feel right about this, Tom.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think everybody was quite surprised that Doug Ford decided to go to the polls this early, given the fact that, yes, he was in his second majority government and looking at a third. You know, a lot of people are speculating as to why he would do this because it clearly doesn't make sense. He's in no different of a position today than he was actually yesterday. So this waste of people's time and an extraordinary amount of money to call an election at this time of year when he still had another year and a half to the next scheduled election or general election, it's a mystery to most people. I think the only rumor that I've actually heard prior to this is that we were kind of hearing rumors he was looking at doing a spring election. And the only rumor we actually heard was that he was thinking about actually retiring. But he wanted to extend out the party's sort of legacy, right? So if he were to go to the spring, he retired, he could go into a leadership shortly after, finally step down and pass the party off to someone else. I don't know whether that's true or not, but we were all spending quite a lot of time trying to figure out what was the upside to him calling an election now. And the other thing is we think maybe he was just trying to keep all of the, let's say, alternative or newer political parties off guard and not allow them to mobilize and have an election or be successful in the election. And by the way, Bobbi Ann Brady, congratulations to her. That's the second time. It can be done. So the proof is in her. You can do this.
What isn't that a great story? The Bobbi Ann Brady story. And you're right. I guess Bobbi Ann Brady, in certain respects, Tom, that's an inspiration for independent candidates, startup political parties such as your own. And what you just said, it can be done. But, it's funny when you mentioned, I have to admit, I did not hear about Doug Ford musing about retirement. I heard quite the opposite. The other day, he said he wanted to be premier forever, which kind of brings to mind images of Napoleon crowning himself. But, what does that tell you about Doug Ford?
Well, I think he's probably just, he's a human being. He's probably just emotional about the fact that he was leading in the polls and he was looking at getting his another majority. And of course, he's going to say that when he's, Ontarians are going to the polls. He's not going to say, "Oh, I'm glad you're voting for me, but I'm out of here soon." Like obviously he's towing his own party line to be successful for the party. But at the end of the day, I think that this was all calculated, obviously, but I don't think Ontarians are any better off they are after going through this whole election cycle for no apparent reason that anybody can determine why he would do this now. Now he says it's because of the tariffs, but Doug Ford was given a 30-day extension by President Trump, which kind of took away his whole tariff narrative to a certain degree. But I'm a little. My personal opinion on this whole tariff idea that he called an election because of the tariffs, I think is fundamentally wrong. I think that if you want to look at the leadership of all the premiers across Canada, I would argue that right now, Premier Danielle Smith has the best approach when working with the Americans to solve real problems. And if you look at all four of the legacy political parties in Ontario, if you look at their platforms, they're all posturing to fight the Americans as opposed to sharing in our rich history between the two countries of cooperation and working together to create strong economies in both countries as well as provinces and states. But you don't see that coming from them. And unfortunately, not a lot of people got an opportunity to hear what some of the other alternative parties had to say, because in typical legacy media fashion, we all got stonewalled and completely shut out.
Which is a shame, and all the more reason I'm happy that you've made some time to come on here with us at Rebel News. But I do agree. I think Danielle Smith has been a superstar out there of late, and to me, Danielle Smith is that rarefied commodity in politics, Tom, genuine. I feel that she says what she means and she means what she says. And I have to tell you, yes, as an Ontarian and someone who leans right of center, I have voted PC in the past, but I didn't vote PC in this election. I did not vote PC in the 2022 election. And Tom, this might surprise you, not even in 2018, after years of vandalism by the McGuinty-Wynne Liberals. And I'll tell you why. My spidey senses were tingling about Doug Ford in terms of being genuine all the way back to 2018. And I think the best example is during the leadership convention after Patrick Brown was ousted in January of 2018, and that there was less than 6 months till the provincial election. As you know, Tanya Ann Allen Granick was running as leader, didn't have much of a hope of being leader, but when she realized that, had her delegates go towards Doug Ford. If they didn't, it was such a photo finish, Doug Ford would have lost to Christine Elliott. Christine Elliott would have been the Premier of Ontario. And of course, Tanya Granick-Allen, her plans were to run as an MPP in Mississauga. And then, what do you know? Some, social media postings that were allegedly too third rail to handle emerged. And bang, Tanya Allen Granick, the kingmaker, well, she was canceled, right? And, even though I have no skin in the game, I felt like it was a punch in the stomach to me. I went, wait a minute. The kingmaker gets disposed of like a used Kleenex because what have you done for me lately because of, some nonsense on social media from over a decade ago. So, Tom, that was my, canary in the coal mine indicator that I don't think these Doug Ford PCs are saying, how they're advertising themselves. I don't think they come as advertised.
No, and I agree with that. And I know Tanya Granick-Allen very well. I think she's an exceptional Canadian. She's an exceptional Ontarian. She's very dedicated to her causes. She's dedicated to her family. She's dedicated to the province. And she's proven that time and again. And yet when you see somebody of that quality be ousted, for me, listen, I had never had any aspirations of being involved in politics. I had, other dreams. I wanted to stay in the military. I wanted to teach eventually. This is what I wanted to do with my life. But what I learned over the last 4 to 5 years is that we need more Canadians with integrity, with principles, with values that align with what Canada was supposed to be about. I'm going to be 52 this year, and I know where I come from. I know the morals, the ethics, and the values that I learned in this country as a member of the Canadian Forces, and as a teacher, and just what it means to be a good person. I think I learned that in Ontario, but now we're looking at a political class of people that have so far diverged from that you can't recognize the current cohort of political uh, mainstream parties. They don't seem to be governing according to what their values are. Conservatives don't. I don't care what anyone says. Conservatives, with the exception maybe of Alberta, do not. They run for elections as conservatives, but they always govern as liberals. Okay, we see this time and again, over and over and over. And I look at a guy like Derek Sloan. Derek Sloan is a man of integrity. He's a man of principle. He's the reason I joined the Ontario Party, and also that the Ontario Party promises or committed to never whipping votes, so that the constituents always had a vote in their MPPs as representatives. Derek has a long history of telling truth to power and standing up for what's right, and has morals, ethics, and values. And he's a deeply spiritual, religious man who, relies on freedom, family, and faith to guide him. And I look at Derek and then I compare him to a guy like Doug Ford. Doug Ford bragged during the pandemic about being one of the most restrictive elected officials in all of North America. And I am disheartened to say the fact that on two occasions since the pandemic has started and ended, and it's doubtful whether there was actually a pandemic, but what's a little bit disheartening is you see a lot of great Canadians, a lot of great Ontarians out there trying to fight to make a difference. But over and over and over, the electorate seems to keep rewarding their domestic abuser. And this is Doug Ford and his entire party. And he runs that party like a dictator, because if you go against any of his dictates, you're gone out of his party, out of the caucus. That's it. So MPPs, Tom, I just want to add, MPPs in his party, they're not MPPs. Make no mistake. They're high-paid administrative assistants inside different constituencies for the dictates of Doug Ford. And it looks like we're about to give him a third majority government to be a dictator again. And I'm really disappointed, honestly, in the Ontario voters for that.
That's a great assessment. I can tell you, Tom, I can never remember an election where so many candidates running under the PC banner where it's like they had sworn an oath of silence in terms of media access. You couldn't get interviews. You couldn't get them to say anything. They weren't making themselves available for scrums. Everything was so controlled. But more than that, to your earlier point, I'm not kidding, Tom. I can't tell the difference between this PC party and the McGuinty-Wynne Liberals during their reign. And I'm talking whether it's the sex ed curriculum, which this party promised to rein in. I would argue it's worse than ever. Whether on the fiscal side, we have a record deficit and debt. I mean, they almost make McGuinty-Wynne Liberals look like fiscal conservatives. So, tell me, where is there? I mean, I don't see it. It reminds me of back in the 70s, there was an old commercial for ABC laundry detergent. That was the bargain brand. And the tagline was, they would show the ABC detergent shirt and the national brand leading detergent shirt. And the housewife would say, I can't tell the difference. Can you tell the difference? Tom, I can't tell the difference. Last word goes to you, my friend.
Well, I agree with what you're saying. I absolutely agree with that. And here's the one thing I want to say about calling the election now, because at the beginning of this, he justified it and says, I need a mandate from the people. And he was talking about doing COVID level spending again, right? He wants to go to the government and say, let's borrow to the bank and borrow a bunch of money. We want to spend to try to get ourselves out of this tariff. Now, here's the one problem. just got elected, and he told the voters, if you elect me, I am going to do this spending. I am going to have stimulus type of spending to fight these tariffs in the same way that I did with COVID. And if it blows up in our face, remember, voters, you asked for it, you wanted it, and you gave me the mandate to do it. So you, voter, you're the one to blame. And that's a big motivation as a premier who wants to have a legacy.
Unbelievable. It's almost the same as what Mark Carney said last week when he was bragging about if he needs to use the Emergencies Act to get his mandate as Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Here on the third anniversary of the brutal shutdown of the Freedom Convoy, sometimes you got to wonder, Tom, if these people are just absolutely tone deaf or don't know how to read a room. Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming on. Good luck with the Ontario Party. And hey, don't be a stranger. Let's have future interviews as you make progress in the province of Ontario.
I'd love to. Thanks, David.
Okay, thank you so much. And folks, that was Tom Marazzo, the Ontario Party president. Now, what do we do for an encore? Well, I'm delighted to say we have independent journalist Harrison Faulkner on standby. And is Harrison there? Yes, there he is. Hey, Harrison, thank you so much for joining me. I got to tell you, the big question going into this snap election, at least for me, you're younger, you probably don't remember, but way back in 1990, the David Peterson Liberals had a majority government. And, the polls looked nice. There was also a scandal they wanted to get off the front page. And they decided that we're going to go to an early election. And Harrison, I can tell you the dynamic in 1990, nobody, and I mean the top polling agencies, the NDP itself, nobody dreamed that everybody was going to wake up in the province that year to an NDP government under Bob Rae. So that was the big question. Is this deja vu all over again? Obviously, not. What do you think was the secret sauce for the Doug Ford PCs in going to the polls early, Harrison?
Well, I think the biggest thing was never letting a crisis go to waste. And we've seen that twice now with the PCs and with Doug Ford. They did that in 2022. I'm not exactly sure if it was an early election or if they had to call it. I think they had to call it, but they won because of a crisis that was happening in the country. And this tariff threat really is, for many people, a crisis. Sometimes other people will blow it up. Other people try to minimize it. But the reality is, if tariffs did come when they were originally expected to come, it would have been a disaster. And so I think Doug Ford just played his cards right and took advantage of this crisis. The other thing, too, however, is that I believe in 1990. I wasn't born for that. I wasn't around for that. But my guess is that Bob Rae's opposition was stronger than the opposition that exists right now in Ontario, because the Ontario Liberals and the Ontario NDP are just so pathetically weak that it's not even doing any service to Ontarians to have such a weak opposition. Whether you're a conservative or a liberal, I think people just want to have competency in office, whether that's in government or in opposition. And, the Liberals and the NDP, they didn't even run a full slate of candidates in this election. They barely had enough money to get this thing going. And Bonnie Crombie lost her seat tonight. So they were pathetically weak. And, David, you look at the situation in Ontario, and the obvious campaign line for the Liberals or the NDP would have been, is your life better after 8 years of Doug Ford than it is? Is it better? And the answer is obviously, I think for most people, no. The situation in Ontario is serious. Millions of Ontarians don't have a doctor. People can barely afford rent. They can barely afford to buy a home. The drug and addiction crisis is getting out of control. Our cities look like a sci-fi movie with the amount of carnage and death on our streets. I mean, this is really getting out of control. The province is not as good as it was before. And yet that wasn't really the line we got from the opposition. David, the opposition said they didn't even want the election in the first place.
No, 100%, Harrison. And I mean, and their coffers were depleted as well.
Right.
Let's not forget. And I'm going to further date myself in regard to how our cities look. I remember back in 1987, I've grown up in Toronto for all of my life except for 4 years. And I can tell you back in 1987, Peter Ustinov said, Toronto is New York as run by the Swiss. Now we are headed towards San Francisco North. That, New York run by the Swiss, that sailed years ago. The city is dirty. There is homelessness everywhere. We're having the worst crime wave ever. And that's the thing, Harrison, what I find incredible about this election. You mentioned early on, never let a crisis go to waste. Well, we have a housing crisis. We have a healthcare crisis. We have a cost of living crisis. We have a crime crisis. But the only crisis that seems to resonate or seemed to resonate, past tense, given that the Ford PCs have won again, is the fact that the Doug Ford PCs rolled the dice. We're going to go up against a candidate not on the ballot, namely Donald Trump, and the impending tariffs. And you need a champion to fight for you, because basically, if you think the cost of living is bad now, you ain't seen nothing yet if those 25% tariffs come in. And I got to say, Harrison, I call him like I see him. It looks like that strategy worked.
It absolutely did work. And you will see almost certainly once Mark Carney wins the Liberal leadership race, they're going to try this as well. They're going to go straight to an election, I think, because this is what is driving Canadian politics. The threat of tariffs basically threw everything else in this country out the window. We seem to forget about all of the issues that are driving our country into the depths. And it's really too bad. But I will say there's two things on this. I think the reaction across the country to this tariff threat has actually been positive. We're now finally getting some traction and some serious talk about border policy and border security. We're also now getting some serious talk about interprovincial trade barriers. These things don't really become serious issues until it's really prompted. So I think that's positive. I have to say, I was listening to your previous segment, and I think that it's important to give a woman named Bobbi Brady her flowers. She won again. She won as an independent, opposing the PC party from the right. What the New Blue Party, what the Ontario Party was trying to do, Bobbi Brady on her own as an independent has been able to do it and get a seat, which is more than what the New Blue and Ontario Party can say for themselves tonight. And I think that that's a big lesson, that a lot of these upstart parties, and you can call them fringe parties, but parties that are trying to break the establishment in this country, and I'm thinking mostly about the PPC at a federal level. You win by dominating the ground game, picking a riding and doing everything you can, putting in the real graft, the hard work to get out the vote. It's a lot more important to have someone in the game when it's all said and done than to put up a good fight and have nothing to say for it.
Harrison, go ahead.
I think that is the lesson that these parties need to learn. They need to realize that whatever Bobbi Brady was doing on her own with her small team in Haldimand, Norfolk, is the answer for how you get in the game.
I couldn't agree more, Harrison. I've met a lot of great people at the Ontario Party, a lot of great people at the New Blue Party. I have all kinds of respect for Jim Karahalios and Derek Sloan. I would just love to lock them in a room and say, you ain't coming out until you put your heads together and run under one banner. Because right now, your focus is split. I think there might be some sort of bad blood between the two camps, which I don't understand. But you are right. Better to have one solitary member at Queen's Park, or in the case of the Greens, two, than just, unfocused opposition. Tell me, Harrison, as you watch the campaigns unfold, did anything stand out? You mentioned that it's official. Bonnie Crombie has lost her seat. I find that absolutely staggering. She is the former mayor of Mississauga of a decade. She was running against I think, a political neophyte in terms of Patrick Brown's mother-in-law.
Your
And
best friend, David.
I know. Well, when it comes to Patrick Brown, it's less politics and more paint and place, if you know what I'm saying. And what I'm getting, one of the bizarre sidebars, I addressed it earlier with Jim Karahalios, Harrison, is that can you possibly explain why the Patrick Brown people seem to be getting welcomed back into this party? It was only 7 years ago when a palace coup ousted Patrick Brown 6 months, which is barely hardly any time before the next provincial election. Everything turned out, of course, rosy for Ford. But I don't get it.
Yeah, well, I think the case with Patrick Brown is that he is the ultimate pragmatist. And he just reads the situation as it is in front of him and does what he needs to do to get the best result for himself at whatever moment that is, depending on really not even depending on the circumstances. Many people who are really have their heart in the game are going to hold on to some grudges, especially if in the case of Patrick Brown, who was set to win, was set to be the premier. David, it could have been Patrick Brown winning his third majority government tonight. If he didn't get cooed out of the job, if he didn't get backstabbed in the middle of the night, basically. But I think what I've heard from some people involved in the PC party and involved in that operation was that Bonnie Crombie and Patrick Brown have their own beef.
Correct.
And so this was a part of Patrick Brown getting one up on Bonnie Crombie. This may be him just, setting himself up for another fight. But really, I can't explain why he would do this. The only explanation I can find is that he had a bigger gripe with Bonnie Crombie than he did with Doug Ford. And so he saw this as an opportunity to backstab Bonnie Crombie, and he successfully did that. I'm amazed at Patrick Brown's political survival and his chameleon-like way of just holding on to power in whatever way possible. It's remarkable that he's the mayor of Brampton. I don't really even know how that came about, to be honest, but he pulled it off and he's still on the job.
You know what, Harrison? I kind of have an idea how he became the mayor of Brampton, and I don't want to say anything that's going to get me into trouble, but if I had Bonnie Crombie's ear right now, I would reach out to Elections Ontario and maybe even the OPP and the RCMP. I would ask for an audit of what happened in the election tonight. I'm just telling you what my sources are telling me. We don't call him Sneaky Patrick Brown for nothing. So if Bonnie Crombie gets wind of this, because after all, I don't know if you saw a report last week, Harrison, we indicated that senior City of Brampton staffers were working on Patrick Brown's mother-in-law's campaign in a different city from Brampton, presumably on the taxpayer dime and time. And this is exactly what happened in 2022 when Patrick Brown ran for federal leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Same deal, using staffers from a different city at his secret Vaughan headquarters, which turned out to be a donation in kind. I don't want to say too much more other than I'm kind of surprised he's not behind bars right now. Harrison, last word goes to you, my friend.
Well, the thing that I'm thinking about now is I'm just shocked at how weak the provincial opposition has been over the past, what it will be likely 8 years. I mean, I just can't believe that the Liberal Ontario leader has lost their seat now in the second election in a row. They barely just made official party status. That number is 12 seats. They're now up to 14 seats, at least as CTV is calling it. It is remarkable that in provincial politics, there is really no opposition right now. Doug Ford, the first Ontario premier to win 3 straight majority governments in 50 years. It's a remarkable political career. It really is. You have to say that. But I think that Ontario voters are poorly served by having such a poor opposition. Whether you're a Liberal or a Conservative, I think we just want competency in politics. And we're just not getting that right now. It's domination and one-party rule, it feels like. But it might not be the worst thing. It would be a lot worse if the NDP won tonight. I think we can all agree on that.
Well, that is indeed what happened in 1990 under very
It didn't go
eerily
so well.
similar circumstances. Harrison, I really appreciate your analysis. And before you go, where can our viewers read your stuff?
You can find me on social media on X. Just search my name, Harrison Faulkner. I'll be there on X.
Okay, and that's Faulkner. Harrison, a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you, David.
You got it. And that was Harrison Faulkner, independent journalist. And now moving right along, speaking of alternative electoral parties, I have now Dave Bismark of the Christian Heritage Party. Dave is actually the deputy leader. And Dave, thank you so much for joining me here on this night, what I call a night of an unwanted and unneeded provincial election. Or perhaps were you buying Doug Ford's ostensible policy reason that he had to go to the polls as soon as possible, even with a supermajority government, because he had to fight that fellow who's not on the ballot, Donald Trump, and his impending tariffs? What say you, my friend?
Those are all good questions. He's an opportunist, and he took the opportunity that was afforded to him by the disarray of the opposition. The game of politics is less about value and principles, and quite significantly about what you can accomplish. I imagine and believe wholeheartedly that when they sit down every morning, the decisions that they make and the choices on how to frame policy, 100% is about how this is going to respond with and react with voters and the electorate. They weighed all those things. They took their polls, they took their feelers, and this was going to give them a win. And so strategically, there's just really nothing to suggest otherwise, that this was a crime of opportunity.
I think you're right, Dave. I think they rolled the dice based on two reasons, as we discussed, the Trump factor, and the polls looked rosy, and it looked like the polls got it right, and the strategy paid off. So I guess in politics, doing the right thing, doing the moral thing, doing the ethical thing, that's a different kettle of fish than, as Al Davis of the Oakland Raiders used to say, just win, baby. But Dave, tell us, you're with the Christian Heritage Party. What is the Christian Heritage Party all about? If you were to give your 30-second elevator pitch to somebody who's not familiar with the Christian Heritage Party, what would it be?
It's quite simple. It's probably the federal version of the Ontario Party or the New Blue Party. We're Canada's only pro-life party, pro-family party. We have fiscal conservative policies. We have free market policies, but generally speaking, it's the pro-life, pro-family. The basic founding fundamental building block of society is the family. We've just seen that eroded for decades. Leftist, socialist engineering has left our country in shambles. There's weakness everywhere. There's violence. There's brokenness. And really, if you consider the issues of this particular election or any of the elections that you hear federally, they're dealing with peripheral issues of the bad orange man in the south, or they're distracting from the real root that's eroding our country as we know it. And we've watched. I've been in politics for 32 years. I ran as a candidate for the CHP in 1993, and I've watched a 32-year erosion of democracy and our family. All the policies that have been enacted, anti-family, even as late as the legalization of marijuana. Social conservatives, the CHP has risen up and said, this is bad. This is bad for children. This is bad for families. And we repeatedly get ignored, and we're reaping where we have sown as a nation. That doesn't mean that the CHP doesn't have a mandate, even more so. Just being ignored we've actually shown, how and by every metric, we're recognizing that this is bad for the country. CHP has stood for that. The New Blue Party and the Ontario Party here in this election did the same. Unfortunately, that message is soundly rejected. Doesn't make it less true.
Indeed. And Dave, let me ask you, since you are a federal party, since you have the word Christian right in your party's name, I want to get your take on how being anti-Christian, if you will, is almost downright fashionable in certain circles. By that, I mean, the last couple of years, we have seen dozens of churches either vandalized or outright incinerated. And instead of condemnation, we even had Gerald Butts, Justin Trudeau's best friend, saying it's understandable. Understandable. Imagine any person connected to a federal leader who would say that about any other kind of place of worship. Yeah, that it's understandable that it was burnt to the ground. What is your opinion on that, Dave?
Well, it is mind-blowing when you consider that the preamble of our nation's constitution states that Canada was founded on principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. I mean, it was so motherhood and apple pie back in 1982 that even Pierre Trudeau had to acknowledge that simple preamble. He put it in the Constitution because it was undeniable. And our country grew and prospered. If you consider where we were at the turn of the century as a fledgling country with this vast geographic expanse, we had to, in that sense, have dominion over. We did that. We did that by grit, by principle, by fortitude. We didn't do that casually or carelessly. We did that by the strength of our arm and the blessing of God. I see nothing other than that. To reject that seems odd, does it not? It's mind blowing. But that is the case. That often happens. Strong men breed. The beautiful societies breed weak men. Weak men tear down beautiful societies. So you get that cycle, and so the prosperity that we enjoyed when we were a Christian nation has been eroded, and now we find brokenness, poverty, violence. It's really a shame. The CHP should be seen as one concept of Christian heritage. That's our heritage. Our heritage is Christian. It's undeniable. It's in our Constitution, and all we need to do is recapture that original vision. I can see it happening. People in their brokenness, they're recognizing that principles are important, that integrity is important. Did we see that reflected in this evening's election? We did not. Actually, the vast majority of people saw no vision. I think the most abysmal number for me this evening is 27% voter turnout.
Wow.
That means that Doug Ford is sitting there with that uber majority with about 12% of the popular vote. Eligible voters, 12%. He's got the mandate that he has. 27% voter turnout. I can't imagine a more challenging statistic that we need to grapple with as Ontarians.
That is a very sad statistic indeed, Dave. And I mean, I think in 2022 was a record low turnout, 44. But if what you're telling me is right, 27, it's appalling that. I get it. It's an unwanted, unneeded election in the middle of a brutal winter. But my goodness, it breaks my heart to see people not exercising their franchise. But Dave, we are all out of time. I want to thank you so much for your time, and good luck with the Christian Heritage Party in the future, my friend.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, sir. And that was the deputy leader of the Christian Heritage Party, Dave Bismark. Folks, we have to cut for a break, and then we are going to have an extra special guest coming in right here, live in studio with me. Don't you dare miss it.
I've got a better idea than tariffs. What would an America First strategy for Canada-U.S. trade look like? Is there room for a Trump-style mega deal even bigger than Greenland? A dozen years ago, I wrote a best-selling book called Ethical Oil, The Case for Canada's Oil Sands, which made the liberal argument that the oil sands are the fair trade coffee of the world's oil industry. In my new book, Deal of the Century, I look at Canada-U.S. trade through an America First lens, and I come to the conclusion that far from putting tariffs on Canadian oil, Donald Trump should ink a 50-year, $13 trillion deal to buy all 170 billion barrels of Canada's oil sands, shutting out China and giving Canada the means to pay for a rebuilt military. And as for yanking Trudeau's chain, well, he'll be gone as prime minister in a few weeks, but I've got a better suggestion for how Trump can slap Trudeau around a bit without hurting America's economic interests. That's in the book too. Get your copy now at dealofthecenturybook.com. And trust me, Trudeau doesn't want you to see this.
It wasn't always like this. When did everything change?
Trudeau, we want freedom!
I have a valid court order here today to vacate everyone from the building.
Bye, Daddy.
I don't think anyone would call it a democracy.
An historic church in northern Alberta has been destroyed by fire.
Major shortage of that, and the cost of living has skyrocketed.
Shame on you!
Is anyone going to push back? There are rebels among us, strong and free, rejecting the new normal, unwilling to be silenced. So what is a rebel?
A journalist.
A farmer.
A hunter.
A father.
A mother. A student.
A real female athlete.
A patriot.
Bold, fearless, and unconventional. Rebels rise up.
Small fringe minority.
I'm in Brazil, so I'm using a VPN to get on the internet. What's a VPN? It stands for a virtual private network, and you get around these government firewalls. Suddenly, the president of Brazil banned his whole country from going on Twitter. It was a political censorship news. I've downloaded the VPN from a company called PIA VPN. We've teamed up with them at Rebel, and it's a great deal. I got on the internet really quickly, safely, and even I'm a bit of a technophobe. I managed to figure it out with 2 clicks. And here's the great news. If you go to piavpn.com/Rebel News, not only do you get a big discount, but they pay us a bit of a commission too. Everyone's a winner. Your freedom, your VPN, and a little bit of cash coming to support Rebel News. I'm using it myself to get around the censors in Brazil. You can use it too. That's piavpn.com/Rebel News. Oh, hi, it's Ezra Levant here in Toronto with an important message because we need your help. Independent journalism in Canada is under attack. Government censors, big tech deplatformers, and the dying legacy media are all working together to maintain exclusive control on the information you receive. They don't want you to hear other voices like ours, and they really don't want you to be informed and to think for yourself. That's why the work we do here at Rebel News is so important. Our on-the-ground reporting, independent news shows, and special content you won't find anywhere else. It's all designed to give you trustworthy information and alternative viewpoints so you can decide for yourself. We don't get government money, and we are not owned by some big global conglomerate. We're funded by people just like you, so please support independent journalism and help us continue our work by subscribing and becoming a Rebel News Plus member today, right here on the page. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. Members get instant access to all of our shows, invitations to exclusive events, and access to our premium content like live event footage and documentaries you won't see anywhere else. Only Rebel News Plus members can join the conversation by participating in the comments section of our new website. That way you can have your say too. More than anything, though, you'll be able to take pride in supporting real, honest journalism, and you'll help our talented team continue to do the work to push back on the establishment. We really can use your help. We need it, in fact. So thank you, and enjoy Rebel News Plus.
Canadians know the national anthem. They stand in silence to remember those who died for this country. But not every Canadian knows their rights and freedoms. The Freedom Passport will change that. It looks and feels like a Canadian passport, but contains the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in a portable, easy-to-read format. The Freedom Passport. Order one for yourself and for all the freedom lovers that you love at freedompassport.ca.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Rebel News live stream coverage of Ontario Votes 2025, aka the election nobody wants. And I am delighted to have in the studio with me Richard Syrett. Richard Syrett is the host of the Richard Syrett Show that is on Saga 960 AM every Monday to Friday from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can listen online, even if you're not in the Toronto area. Richard, I think, is one of the best broadcasters on GTA radio right now. Heck, Richard, I'll cut to the chase. Given what I'm hearing over the air these days on radio, if some of those hosts don't get off the air soon, I'm going to stop breathing it.
How are you, my friend? Good to be
Doing
here.
great. It's great to see
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Richard, I want to get your thoughts into Ontario Votes 2025, but I understand we have Bonnie Crombie's concession speech. This is interesting because Mississauga East Cooksville, that was one of my top 10 ridings to watch for obvious reasons. Bonnie Crombie, being the Liberal leader, needs to win a seat.
Yep.
And the drama, the behind-the-scenes drama, Patrick Brown's mother-in-law going up against Bonnie Crombie, equal parts politics and paint and place, I should think. So, folks, let's hear what Bonnie Crombie had to say after losing in Mississauga East Cooksville.
Let's hear from Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for being here. I want to thank each and every one of you for everything you have done in the last 28 days. Oh my gosh, those snowbanks, the salt, how many pairs of shoes have you ruined? You've really stepped up. And many of you put your name on the ballot that are in the room here tonight. So, listen, running for office is no small thing. So no matter who you ran for, or our province and our democracy are better because of the hard work, right? So thank you. I know tonight isn't exactly the result we were looking for, but you should be very, very proud of what we did tonight. People counted us out. They said the Ontario Liberal Party was dead. Huh. Tonight, you prove them wrong. The Ontario Liberal Party is back to official party status, and that's a big milestone. But it gets better. We increased our share of the votes substantially to 30%. Double digits over the NDP, right? So this is a building block for us. It is a momentum that we can continue to push forward and to grow, right? So tonight, let's celebrate all our new MPPs that we're going to bring back, and let's celebrate coming back to party status. so that tomorrow we can get back to work, making sure those other guys do their jobs. Look, voters have given Doug Ford another mandate tonight.
Well, Richard, I guess what else is she to do but to look for the proverbial silver lining in that cloud? But I can't, I'm not resonating. If I was an Ontario Liberal, I'm not very proud, as she was saying they should be. Right now, 79 seats for the PCs, 25 for the NDP, 14 for the Liberals. Yes, they're back to official party status, but I think at the very least, the goal was the official opposition, and Bonnie Crombie winning her own seat. I think it's somewhat embarrassing. I mean, she was the mayor of Mississauga for a decade and couldn't win in Mississauga, East Cooksville. What do you make of the results, and what do you make of her reaction, Richard?
Dave, I can't believe how cynical you are. And in fact, I'm disappointed you cut that speech short. It was Churchillian. That's right. They're building momentum. In another 40 years, they could be the official opposition in Ontario. This is just a political juggernaut.
Yeah. Well, I guess you build momentum when you fall off a cliff too, right? But
so 30% of 27% is, you do the math.
Oh, are you kidding? I'm a grade 11 math dropout, brother.
Well, here's the lesson here. If you're gonna run, if you're gonna lead a party and you're gonna run a campaign, you need ideas. You need policies.
Yeah.
I can't recall any from the Liberals. I mean, the NDP, to their credit, they wanted to get rid of the tolls on the 407.
Yep.
They want to build a hospital in Brampton. None of that's going to happen. But I mean, they came to the table with some ideas. What did Bonnie Crombie come to the table with? I don't. Maybe there was, but it didn't resonate. I didn't hear it. There was no buzz about it.
No, I think you're bang on, Richard. And I think both the NDP and the Liberals, they were very focused on what is always two very important issues in our province, in Canada for that matter, the healthcare crisis, the housing crisis. And usually those are top bill items as well as the cost of living. But as I said with our other guest, Richard, Doug Ford, he rolled the dice. I'm going to go against the man not on the ballot, Donald Trump. I'm going to reimagine myself as Captain Canada. I'm going to say, if you think cost of living is bad right now, will you see what happens to us under 25% tariffs? That was the predominant issue. And I don't think, Bonnie and Merritt Stiles, the NDP leader, I don't think they caught on and grabbed the imagination of Ontario voters as much as the Doug Ford PCs did.
Well, I'm not sure that the Doug Ford PCs did either, really, given the horrendous, embarrassing turnout, 27%. I mean, it leads one to despair almost for the state of democracy. Yeah. This was every one of your fine guests tonight. I think I've made the point that this was incredibly cynical on Doug Ford's part. I think what he was really afraid of, with or without the tariffs, the state of the economy in this province is on a downward trajectory. We are basically Mississippi with a king.
Yes.
In this province.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with Doug Ford. 8 years, he's just Ontario is so blessed with resources and an educated workforce. It's like coaching the 75 Canadians. They lost 8 games in 1975. I could have been behind the bench opening the gate with that lineup, and they would have placed no worse than third. All you have to do in this province is get the hell out of the way.
You could have been in goal with that lineup and they'd still have a record like
Precisely. And so what has happened to this province under Doug Ford's watch? So what he's really afraid of is going to the polls in June of 2026 when things are even worse than they are today, with or without tariffs. We're on a downward trajectory.
Yeah.
It was a great tweet I saw today. Someone was talking about Trump and the tariffs. He said, all Donald Trump did was turn on the lights and exposed the rats.
Yeah.
You don't blame the person who turned on the lights.
Yeah.
You blame the rats.
Yeah. Richard, here's the other thing. as I said, this was an unwanted, unneeded election. But at the end of the day, a W is a W, whether it's a blowout or it's a default. And I just, I think it was all about opportunism. I think you're right. Things have a good chance of getting worse. The Doug Ford PCs looked at the poll numbers, pretty rosy. Polls turned out to be true in this regard. I, did a monologue earlier this month, 10 reasons why conservatives can't vote for the Doug Ford PCs. Believe me, there's a lot more than 10 reasons. And the fact of the matter is, Richard, as a conservative, I don't find this to be a conservative party whatsoever. I find it indistinguishable from the Win Liberals. And I know some of the blowback I got when I had that monologue published. People say, oh, so you're saying go out and vote NDP or Liberal? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that all three are horrible. Is that the benchmark for conservatives in this province? I'm going to vote for the least horrible of the three? I'm not buying that.
There was a lot of hope when Doug Ford became the leader because he talked like a social conservative. He talked like a fiscal conservative. Yeah. He was talking about, line item audits, right down to the pencil in every office. And he spoke out against wokeism and so forth. And he just pulled the wool over everybody's eyes.
Correct.
It's such a betrayal of the base. And I've been to enough backyard parties with PC MPPs, some of whom are my friends. But here's the level of cynicism when you talk to them and you say, "Wait a minute, why are you betraying the base? Why aren't you governing like conservatives?
Yes.
Why are you letting these school boards go completely off the rails?" Yeah. I mean, it's loony town in this province right now. And they say, well, because if we delivered on what we promised, we'd never get voted in again. So that's what this is about? It's about you preserving your job? And they say, well, who else are you going to vote for? But how cynical is that?
It's unbelievable. And it is a betrayal of the base. And let's, talk about what you were saying, Richard. Wokeism, for example. This is a man in 2018 when the city of Victoria, BC was way ahead of the Sir John A. Macdonald cancellation. They tore down their statue. Ford went on social media. You can look it up. And he said, hey, you have a problem with Sir John? Send him to Ontario. We'll find a place for him. You go to Queen's Park for 5 years, our Sir John statue has been in a makeshift coffin with a garbage bag over his head because they don't want to, trigger BLM and Antifa people. The sex ed curriculum, which was a plank they ran on in 2018, reining it in, it's even worse than the McGuinty Win days. I don't remember drag queens like Busty Lemieux teaching shop back then. Transgenderism. We have seen female safe spaces, bathrooms, change rooms, sports, including contact sports like rugby, volleyball, being invaded by males, female penitentiaries. He doesn't speak out against any of this. We have a minister of sport, Neil Lumsden, CFL Hall of Famer. You would think he, above all else, someone who's walk the walk as well as talking the talk, he'd understand the inherent problems of men competing against females in a contact sport like rugby. He doesn't say anything, and instead I get arrested for asking insensitive questions. Richard, this is madness. This is the ultimate political version of bait and switch.
Well, I call Ontario the land that time forgot. You look what's happening in the rest of the world. They are running away from this nonsense.
Yes.
Not walking, they are running. In Ontario and other parts of this country, we are doubling down. That's Canada, always behind the curve. And we will be the last jurisdiction on this planet to come to their senses.
So I guess the question arises, Richard, is that is the PC party, have they tapped onto something? Have they realized that the majority of Ontarians really don't want or subscribe to conservative values that will pretend we're conservatives, and I even hate the term PC, progressive conservative, because they're way more progressive and far less conservative. So basically, we got to be a version of liberal light in order to get elected. Is that what it comes down to?
Well, I think if you're a coward, that's your perception. I mean, Mike Harris, not the perfect politician, pretty flawed, had some great ideas, some bad ideas, but he ran on principle. With Doug Ford, this is the problem the NDP and the Liberal Party are facing. He's all things to all people. If you're the NDP and you're all about giving away free stuff, well, so is Doug Ford.
Yeah,
he loves to give away free things, $200 and so forth. It's difficult to run against people who give away things for free. It's difficult to run against free stuff. And that's the conundrum that the opposition is in. Doug Ford is all things to all people. He is, what does he stand for? Well, it depends on who has his ear at any given moment.
And that's a great point about those $200 payola checks going out coincidentally on the eve of an election. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but Richard, there are social conservatives and there are fiscal conservatives, but this is not a fiscal conservative government either. It's a record debt, a record deficit. It makes the McGuinty-Wynne people look like spendthrifts. So I'm trying to see the upside in a PC government if you lean conservative.
Well, there is none. There is none. Just the debt now, what is it, approaching $500 billion, the provincial debt? $500 billion. We have the largest sub-sovereign debt in the world, greater than California even. That's the mess that we're in. That the interest on that is $1 billion a month. You can build a state-of-the-art hospital for $1 billion. We could build a new hospital every month in this province, but we're burning the money.
Unbelievable. And the perverse irony here is this man used to subscribe to one of the best political slogans of the early 21st century. I would argue him and his brother both ran on it. Respect for taxpayers. Can you imagine? Richard, we're going to take a little break. Let's hear Doug Ford's victory speech, and then we'll weigh in with a little analysis after he's done. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Boy, what a crowd. Thank you so much. And what a night. And what a result. Thank you so much. Together we have made history. Together we have secured a strong, historic third majority mandate. A mandate to protect Ontario from the bottom of my heart. I thank you for being here, for sharing this incredible moment with me. To the thousands of volunteers right across this province who braved the cold, who knocked on over 2 million doors, tonight belongs to you. Thank you. I want to begin by thanking Carla and my daughters for your endless support. I couldn't do this without you. I also want to thank Mart Stiles, Bonnie Crombie, Mike Schreiner, and every single person who put their name on a ballot. We can disagree on policy, but there's no question at all. Each one of them loves our province, and each one of them loves Canada, the greatest country on earth. Democracy only works if people are willing to step up and step forward. Our province is stronger because of your decision to do so, so I want to thank all the candidates. Absolutely. During my time in office, I hope I've proven I will work with anyone, I will work with everyone to get things done. Now, as we stare down the threat of Donald Trump's tariffs, I will continue to do just that. I will work with every level of government and every political stripe, because fighting back against Donald Trump, standing up for Canada, it will take a full Team Ontario effort. it will take a full Team Canada effort. Friends, over the last 7 years, we've made so much progress together. Over 1 million more people are working today than when we were elected in 2018. We've attracted over $70 billion in new investments into our economy, in new auto and battery plants, in our manufacturing sector, in new life science facilities, in Ontario's growing tech sector. Now together, we have to fight hard to protect our progress. This election, we ask the people for a mandate, a strong mandate that outlives and outlasts the Trump administration. A mandate to do whatever it takes to protect Ontario. Well, friends, the people have spoken. They're ready to stand up for Canada. This election, we ask the people for a mandate to make Ontario the most competitive place in the G7 to invest, create jobs, and do business. The people said yes. We asked the people for a mandate to unleash the awesome economic potential of the Ring of Fire. The people said yes. We asked the people for a mandate to build up our economy by tearing down internal trade barriers, and the people said yes. We asked the people for a mandate to cut rates.
Wow. Oh, Richard, so much to unpack there. Let me give you a quick analysis, and then I want to hear, of course, what you have to say. You know, he was speaking about, having a mandate to exploit the Ring of Fire. That's that, mining project in Northern Ontario full of precious metals. He was promising that in 2018. Ring of Fire. That was the first time I heard Ring of Fire. Talking about dismantling trade barriers. Are you kidding me? This has been around twas ever thus. It's easier for me to import a case of wine from France than British Columbia. Over the last 7 years, made so much progress. And then he goes on to talk about the EV battery plant investments. Those are in the tens of billions of dollars. Richard, I personally think these are white elephants in the making. Mm-hmm. Building batteries for expensive cars that the vast majority of car buyers do not want or cannot afford. So that has disaster written all over it. Here's another nugget. Democracy only works when people step up. To your point, 27%, not even 1/3 stepped up. So how can you call that democracy in action? And at the very beginning, he wanted to thank every single person who put their name on the ballot. Not Bobbi and Brady, not the independent candidate who used to be with the PCs. He has a vendetta against her. He actually called her out at Queen's Park last year, Richard, saying, we're going to make you unemployed. Gee, not so job-friendly when it comes to a personal grudge, which is inexplicable. I mean, one independent, when you have a supermajority, it's insane. Richard, a lot of these things, when you analyze what he just said there in those 4 or 5 minutes, it doesn't add up to me. Your thoughts?
He's going to make this the most competitive jurisdiction in the G7. It is to laugh. It is to laugh. $600 billion have fled this country, not all of it from Ontario, but during the Trudeau years. This is so uncompetitive a jurisdiction because of our electricity rates and so forth, that we've got to bribe Volkswagen to build these plants. And as you say, white elephants. I guarantee you in 5 years, these structures will all be giant daycare centers or casinos.
Yeah,
he bet on the wrong horse, and that was evident at the time when that money was committed. Volkswagen in Europe had already scaled down sales and production of electric vehicles. It's dead in the water.
Yep.
It's going to be that's going to come back to haunt him. or it should, if there's any justice.
You know,
It's a
you
huge
have
tactical error.
You often have a great guest on your radio program, Dan McTague, a Liberal MP of 18 years. No, don't crucify me, folks. Dan McTague was a classical Liberal, not this current, Marxist type of Liberal we have here. But he used to be with Toyota Motor Company, and we did a story recently about these EVs, Richard. And Toyota Motor Company, given that they're the biggest and most profitable automotive company in the world, I think they know a thing or two about making cars. They don't have any EVs. They have one plug-in hybrid, one of the Prius models. But Dan was saying that they're waiting it out because there's a next generation solid state battery. It's going to be lighter. The charge times are less. You're going to get way, way more range. So it's almost as though we're investing in plants making VHS tapes when the DVD is on the horizon. That's what makes me think this has all to do with virtue signaling and not any kind of return on investment. Your thoughts?
Well, I agree with you. He's not reading the room. He's not looking at what's happening in the rest of the world. The EV mandates are not going to be around in this country for very long.
Yeah.
I think either Poilievre will get rid of them, and if it happens to be Mark Carney, God forfend, I think he'll probably get rid of them as well. I don't see electric vehicles, being a driver in this economy. The top 5 vehicles remain gas-powered SUVs and minivans.
Yeah.
And it'll remain that way for the foreseeable future. It's just a horrific blunder that this province has made,
especially with our climate, and that's a whole other story. It's also funny he said that we want to have a mandate in Ontario that will outlive the Trump administration. What about outliving the J.D. Vance administration? Because the Democrats look so rudderless right now. It looks like they did not learn any lessons about why Trump won last November. So, again, it speaks to your point. So many countries in the world, they're getting away from wokeism. They're getting away from cancel culture. They're getting away from virtue signaling bad investments. And yet here, Doug Ford looks at the Trump template as a negative thing.
Populist conservatism is the trend of the future. I mean, it's happening now in Europe. It's going to sweep the world. And again, we will be left behind. Although maybe we can take some solace in the fact that Doug Ford really doesn't have any principles. And if he finds it at some point convenient, maybe to embrace populism, conservatism, maybe he will. These are my principles, and if you don't like them, I have others.
Yeah. And you know what, Richard? I'm going to give you a true story here. Is Doug Ford calling the shots, or are there puppet masters behind the scenes? And Doug Ford is just so giddy still, 7 years later, from going from a wannabe mayor in a city in Ontario to the premier of Ontario that he'll do anything they darn well please. I reversed the clock to 2017. In this very room, I had Doug Ford come in for an interview, very cordial interview. And after it was done, he got up and he looked around and he said, Dave, I'm thinking back in the days of Sun News. Remember Ford Nation? Remember that show we did? I said, Doug, how could we ever forget? He said, you know what? Why don't we do a weekly Ford Nation show? I said, Doug, I'll be your co-host. You name the time, the day, we'll do it. I went in, told Ezra about it. I've never seen Ezra so happy in all his life. That was September 2017. And went into October, November. My calls, my texts aren't being returned. And finally, I caught up with Doug Ford at a press conference. This is when he still had ambitions to be mayor. And he was speaking out against the King Street right-of-way streetcar. And I attended it and I asked my question. Then when it was all over, I went up to him politely and I said, Doug, I hate to be a nag, but I'm not hearing from you about this show. And my boss, Ezra, he wants to get on this ASAP. And Doug Ford said to me, Richard, he said, Dave, if it was up to me, I would do the show tomorrow. But Dave, you have to understand, it's the team, Dave. The team doesn't think it's the right fit. I think that was a precursor to tell you all you need to know about Doug Ford. He's not his own man. Rob Ford was his own man. Donald Trump is his own man. They're not beholden to a team. I think Doug Ford is.
Well, that explains a lot. It explains why this is really a radical progressive party.
Yeah.
I mean, having to say conservative in the same sentence as this, I mean, I choke on that. It's a radical progressive party. There is nothing conservative, not fiscally conservative, not socially conservative, not even centrist.
Yeah.
This is not even a centrist party. Makes me pine for the days of Dalton McGuinty by comparison.
And, speaking of a liberal premier, there was a lot of speculation. I know you're old enough to remember 1990, Richard, under David Peterson, a majority liberal government, went to the polls early. Kind of eerie circumstances. There was some scandal with Ford. It's the Green Belt with Peterson.
Patty Starr. It was the Patty Starr
Patty
scandal.
Starr. That's right.
Yeah.
That's
$160,000 in inappropriate campaign. I mean, imagine today. That's just doing business.
That's what you find in the couch
Yeah.
at Queen's Park in terms of change. But I can tell you back then, Richard, not even the elite polling companies, not even the NDP itself dreamed that when Ontarians woke up the next day, there was an NDP government under Bob Rae. So it is fraught with danger because the electorate was really pissed off. They either voted for another party or they didn't come out to vote, not even thinking that, cumulatively the NDP would get enough votes to be the one-hit wonder that it was. Clearly that didn't happen. It looks like, positioning himself as Captain Canada and concentrating on the Trump factor paid dividends.
No question. I guess if you have to give him credit for anything, he recognized that Trump derangement syndrome is a rich vein to be mined in this province and in this country and in the Greater Toronto area in particular. Despite all you were pointing out earlier, that Donald Trump really has held up a mirror to Canada. And now, as you say, for the first time, we're talking about, or maybe it was Harrison Faulkner, we're talking about border security. We're talking about building pipelines across this country. We can thank Donald Trump for that.
We can. And these are indeed good things. And I think you'll also see the federal government ponying up our NATO commitment funding, which Trudeau promised to get in place by 2032. Trump's not going to stand for that. Indeed. Overall, this election, I call it unwanted. I call it unneeded. I say it's bogus that Doug Ford needed a mandate. He had a mandate. He had a majority government and 18 months, which is an eternity in politics, Richard. When you look back at this very short, wintry election campaign, are there any things that stand out to you?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It will be forgotten. People will look back. They won't look back. Or they'll try to remember, wait a minute, did we have an election in 2025? There's nothing. There was no need for it. It was a cynical ploy. That's reflected in the abysmal turnout. Doug Ford should be embarrassed by that. He's got his mandate, 12%. That's his mandate.
Yeah.
He's going to spend us into oblivion like you did during COVID. We'll have nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
For 12% of the people spoke for Doug Ford. 12%.
And Richard, the proof is in the pudding or the cherry cheesecake, as the case may be. I predicted correctly this would be the lowest turnout in Ontario election history. The last lowest turnout was 2022, 44%. But saying that, my friend, I never dreamed 27%. I never dreamed it would be below a third. Is that just voter apathy? Is it the weather? I mean, what is it?
I guess if you're standing in line at the food bank, getting out to cast your ballot is kind of low priority. Or I don't know if you're in a park under a tarp somewhere.
Yeah.
People are just struggling. They're struggling. This is not a high priority. They're trying to keep the lights on. They're trying to put food on the table.
And, Richard, that's a very good point, too, because Harrison Faulkner correctly said that, as with all elections, the primary question comes down to, are you better off today than you were blank number of years ago? In this case, 7 years ago, 2018. And Richard, unless you invested in pharmaceutical stocks, I would argue that no, the vast majority are not better off. Last week, I went to a Pierre Poilievre press conference. It was a brilliant press conference. He had it at a food bank in West End, Toronto. This one food bank, Richard, in 2020 had serviced on a regular basis 10,000 clients, okay? Mm-hmm. Today, 70,000 clients. One food bank, right? By the way, coincidentally, Mark Carney signed on as the financial advisor to Blackface in 2020. So how's that working for us? So how was this query lost in this election? Are you better off today than you were 7 years ago? Because people in my circle, they're struggling, Richard.
Well, there are two types of leaders. There are those who simply manage the decline, and then you have disruptors. Donald Trump is a disruptor. I think Danielle Smith out in Alberta is a bit of a disruptor. Doug Ford is a manage the decline.
Yeah.
And so are our opposition leaders, so are most of the MPPs that we have at Queen's Park. It's really a disservice to Ontarians that this is what we have. These are not our best and our brightest by any stretch. They are here to manage the decline, and that's what they're doing.
Speaking of Mark Carney, Richard, I was speaking with my beloved colleague Sheila Gunn-Reid the other day when we were doing the afternoon live stream, and I found it very odd that just 48 hours before the provincial election, Bonnie Crombie would come out and endorse Mark Carney. I thought maybe better wait until after the election. Maybe there's a lot of people that might like Bonnie Crombie as a provincial Liberal, but are scared of Mark Carney, especially with him saying, I'll enact the Emergencies Act to get my mandate done here on the third anniversary of the brutal takedown of the trucker convoy. And Sheila, I thought, had a brilliant point. No. She's saying this right now because when she doesn't win on Thursday, she'll be fishing for a federal riding to run in, and she wants to get on the good side of someone who looks like he's going to be coronated as leader. Do you think that was what was behind that?
I was going to say maybe she saw some internal polling and realized that she wasn't going to pull this one out. She wasn't going to win the seat. I would expect her probably to resign in the next few days.
Interesting. Okay.
And any port in a storm. Thus is always the way with careerists.
Yes.
Right? And that's what she is. She's a careerist. And that's, unfortunately, it's so sad. That's what we have in this province. We have people who manage the decline. We have careerists, and we don't have people with great depth or gravitas. We don't have disruptors, and we are living in such tumultuous times. These times demand a disruptor.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Richard, it was a delight having you in with your analysis. Let's talk about where people can hear you. I'm a big fan of yours, as you know. We have Saga 960.
That's right.
People can also hear Mark Petroni and Jack Berkovitz there. You've got a real stellar cast that you're building on that little independent radio station. And I believe you have a podcast too, don't you?
Well, the show airs 4 to 6 p.m. on Saga 960. Saga as in Mississauga.
Yeah.
SAUGA 960am.ca. You can stream it online.
Okay.
The show is also available as a podcast, The Richard Syrett Show, wherever you find your podcast. And we've launched a brand new YouTube channel at Richard Syrett 64.
Oh.
And my monologues are posted there, and just posted an interview I did with Ruby Dalla, and there's a Max Bernier interview up there, Naomi Wolf. So YouTube at Richard Syrett 64.
Well, Richard, like I said, you've been hitting it out of the park lately. So, folks, please tune in. Find out what Richard has to say. His monologues are absolutely fantastic. And Richard, I want to thank you for coming down all the way from Thornhill to North Toronto at nighttime when traffic actually moves here. And I'll be sure to follow you on Saga 960. And any predictions as a parting question on where Doug Ford is going to take us?
Into oblivion.
I'm sorry I asked. Richard, thanks so much
All right.
again. Okay, thank you. Folks, we have to cut for an ad break, and then we'll be right back. Thank you.
It wasn't always like this. When did everything change?
We want freedom!
I have a valid court order here today to vacate everyone from the building.
Bye, Daddy.
I don't think anyone would call it a democracy.
An historic church in northern Alberta has been destroyed by fire.
Major shortage of that, and the cost of living has skyrocketed.
Shame on you!
Is anyone going to push back? There are rebels among us, strong and free, rejecting the new normal, unwilling to be silenced. So what is a rebel?
A journalist.
A farmer.
A hunter.
A father.
A mother. A student.
A real female athlete.
A patriot.
Bold, fearless, and unconventional. Rebels rise up.
Small fringe minority.
Balls belong in women's sports, just as long as they're not attached to a biological male. Did you see the shameful moment in the Paris Olympics when Italian female boxer Angela Carini had to forfeit her match just seconds in because she was boxing against a biological male?
Solid straight right hand from police there. About being pulled off by the referee.
It was shocking. Angela said she had to quit because she had never been punched so hard. Now, Rebel News, you know, we've been fighting to keep women's spaces safe, especially women's sports. If you agree with us, then you will love our new t-shirt design. So you can proudly say that you think women shouldn't have to be beaten up by biological males in their own sports. Our design says no human balls in women's sports. It's a bit cheeky, and it lets people know you stand with Angela and all the other female athletes like her who deserve better. Go to
If you want to look good and shine like me, you can do so at our store. Go to ribbonnewsstore.com. On this website, you have so much different style to wear, as this one, my favorite one, Justin Castro. With my code Alexa10, you will have 10% off on your next purchase. So don't hesitate, go now and look so good.
Canadians know the national anthem. They stand in silence to remember those who died for this country. But not every Canadian knows their rights and freedoms. The Freedom Passport will change that. It looks and feels like a Canadian passport, but contains the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in a portable, easy-to-read format. The Freedom Passport. Order one for yourself and for all the freedom lovers that you love at freedompassport.ca.
Okay. Well, there you have it, folks. The results are in, and it's the same old compared to 2022 and 2018. The Doug Ford PCs have another super majority. So if you're a PC supporter, if you're a Ford Nation fan, and that is if you're still a Ford Nation fan, because let's not forget Doug Ford during the pandemic threw Ford Nation under the bus by calling them a bunch of yahoos when they were protesting those horrible COVID-19 mandates. But you're happy. I'm looking for a silver lining in this for me. That would be Bobbi and Brady winning again as an independent, a Herculean task. And I want to congratulate Bobbi and Brady. And it just shows you, here's a candidate in Miss Brady who says what she means and means what she says. No big blue party machine behind her, but someone running on integrity. And well, guess what? She is well loved and well respected in Haldeman, Norfolk. And she pulled off the improbable for the second time in the space of 3 years, winning against the big parties. So good for Bobbi and Brady, especially given the way in which she became an independent in the first place. So we have another 4 years of the Doug Ford PCs. And I want to address something we do, and it goes back to that monologue I broadcast earlier this month, which was, 10 reasons if you're a conservative why you can't vote for the Doug Ford PCs. Some of the blowback is that, so you want people to vote Liberal or NDP. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we should aspire to a higher benchmark. We shouldn't cast our vote for the least worst mainstream political party. But that seems to be the mantra of too many voters right now. I want to see, I guess, more Bobbi and Brady's out there and less Doug Fords, to be quite frank. The second thing that is the takeaway, 27% turnout. As I said to Richard Syrett on the last segment, I predicted this might be the lowest turnout ever, but not even 1/3. Folks, that's just downright pathetic. But it is what it is in our system. And Ford was able to translate 12% of the popular vote into a super majority. So all I can say is moving forward, we will hold the Doug Ford government to account. Look, full disclosure, I want the Ford PCs to do well. Why wouldn't I? I'm an Ontarian. I want people to recover from this economic smackdown we've been under since COVID. But if he is not acting in the interests of Ontarians, well, we're going to call him out. Absolutely. And I do believe, super producer Olivia, did you have a tweet from Justin Trudeau? Yes. Here we go. Congratulations at Ford Nation on your re-election. Ontario and Canada are at their best when we work together to defend Canadian interests, protect workers, and make life more affordable, which is none of the things Justin Trudeau's done in a decade, but I digress. Wishing you and your team the best as you head back to work for the people of Ontario. Gotta say, folks, why is it we always see Doug Ford with Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? Why don't we ever see Doug Ford with Pierre Poilievre? My sources tell me it's that the Doug Ford people and the Pierre Poilievre people just don't like each other. But my goodness, guys, let's bury the hatchet and get focused on what Ontarians and Canadians really want. In any event, folks, we're going to wrap it here. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I want to say thank you to all my special guests that contributed. And as always, stay safe and stay sane.